In October 2023, I attended Monsterfest with the film I was most excited to see being the subject of today's review. I got to get a photo with Aaron Gocs and got to watch the cast and crew of this movie have a wonderful time with the audience that was there to check it out. I sat down to watch the movie and the audience around me erupted with laughter. But when I walked out of the screening and the festival organizer said to me, "What do you think?" all I could say was, Gallipoli was funnier.
Ho 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 ho, delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Yes, everybody, welcome back. And today I'm going to be talking about the absolute worst film I saw at the cinemas in 2023 with the Emu War, the first feature-length movie by Hot Dad Productions. And this movie first came across my radar when comedian Aaron Gocs mentioned that he would be appearing in it. I had been following him for a period of time because I was quite fond of his dry sense of humor, with his Simpsons impressions and his video titled Stitch Up at Work Today doing pretty solid numbers. And with the opportunity to see him transition onto the cinematic screen with a film called The Emu War, I thought this was a project that was brimming with potential. As a little context for any non-Australian viewers, the Emu War itself is a historical event which is actually legendary in Australian folklore. A huge part of Australian culture is us taking the piss out of ourselves and mocking our own history. And the Emu War is one of the pinnacles of that because it refers to a military operation in 1932 where soldiers were given light machine guns in an effort to try to curb the expanding emu population because they were destroying the crops. But despite our soldiers running and gunning them down, they only managed to curb 986 emus. So while a country like America is known for losing a war to Vietnamese farmers, we lost one to giant flightless birds. And we wear that with pride. Australia! Yeah, cuz! Today's film decided to take that event and turn it into a completely absurdist comedy. And at the time of recording this, the movie currently has 10 written reviews on IMDb. One of them was by me, 3 of them were positive, and here are 3 excerpts from the other 6. The Emu War stands out not for its creativity, but for its staggering lack of quality. Juvenile, pathetic, and not funny. An embarrassment to Australian movie making that hopefully will die and rot under a rock sooner rather than later. This was so bad, I removed it from my server due to not wanting the embarrassment of someone else knowing I've seen it. Has to be the worst movie in Australian cinema history and possibly the worst in the world. It's so bad I thought it was a sequel to Pearl Harbor. I gotta disagree with that last review because I actually love Pearl Harbor both ironically and unironically. From a technical perspective, the film is constructed brilliantly. And from a narrative perspective, it is so ham-fisted and over the top that it's unintentionally hilarious. Even one of the positive reviews says this was poor in quality, yet it was intentionally so. So, let's talk about why. The Emu War begins with our protagonist, Major Meredith, mid-battle at Emu Massacre Creek in 1932.
Major, it's for you. Major Meredith, go ahead.
What's up? What's up?
I thought I'd start this review with a joke because we're really not going to get many jokes from the film itself. Meredith has flashbacks to the time that the very few actors this film could actually afford gathered for some kind of hoedown.
If you're a cockatoo, then I am too. Everybody sing like a cockatoo. Gonna rock this Billington sings for you. Cockatoo was a true blue.
How good is he?
Actually, he's completely flat, and so is the entire scene itself. I don't fault the child actor for this. I think that this was done intentionally, and I don't really know why. And I can understand only bringing a few extras in because this movie was done on a very small budget, but if you're gonna do that, maybe film it in a way that makes this feel less obvious. Much of the cinematography in the Emu War is good, but here it starts things off with a cheap feeling. For reasons that aren't yet established, his son is taken by an emu, establishing the personal stake Meredith has in the war.
Our boy was taken. It's all your fault. Being the world's best wobbleboard player won't bring our dead son back.
She ain't funny. Next!
Our lives are whooping out of control!
I don't understand a word this guy is saying.
Margaret! Margaret!
Margaret! Margaret!
Oh no, not the suicide shed.
You heard that right, folks, the suicide shed. You know, I'm all for dark humor if the humor is there, and just because they put the word suicide in there for the sake of being edgy, it doesn't make it comedy. Nor does it make it funny. Whatever, the trauma encourages Meredith to lead his squad on a full infantry attack despite knowing full well that the enemy have set a trap, establishing that our protagonist is also an asshole who knowingly gets all his men killed. This is the guy we're meant to root for in the film, and he really doesn't redeem his assholery at any point. He actually just exacerbates it.
Fuck that guy.
I agree. Yeah.
Fucking... shit.
Then the title pops up before we cut to the Prime Minister.
Just read exactly what's written on the page.
Gotcha. No jokes. Unless I think of a good one.
You won't, we can tell that by the intro.
And now for a formal announcement from the Honourable Harold Holt, Prime Minister of Australia.
And the moment this was said, I became deeply cynical. First of all, Harold Holt was elected Prime Minister in 1966, a full 34 years after this movie was meant to have taken place. Secondly, this actor doesn't look the vaguest bit like Harold Holt at all. With all the Googling in the world, you would not find a single picture of him with any facial hair. But of course, maybe that's the joke. Maybe the fact that he looks nothing like Harold Holt and didn't actually serve as PM in the 30s is this movie's idea of a joke. I can only speculate because after watching this film twice, I still can't understand it.
It is with grave concern that I formally address you, the citizens of this great nation. But first, a good joke.
Shit.
So when I arrived here to give this broadcast, I needed to do a big piss. And I said to my assistant, can I please go to the little boy's room? She led me into a bathroom, and I said no. I meant a room filled with little boys. So you can imagine the sort of mischief I'd be getting up to in there.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So first we had suicide, and now we've got diddling kids. The Emu War seems to think that by just putting something shocking into the script, that automatically makes it funny. It doesn't. You have to make it part of a joke, and you have to make that joke funny. They're 0 for 2.
Do not diddle kids, it's no good diddling kids.
Our special forces were attacked by some rogue emus, and 37,000 young soldiers' lives were tragically cut short.
37?
The emus will not be victorious. Emus, oh God, I've pissed my pants. I'm pissing my pants right now.
Oh, for fuck's sakes, this movie actually refuses to have any rhythm. In fact, it keeps on putting what it thinks are jokes into moments that interrupt elements of the story that are meant to be establishing the narrative. I mean, you know, at least in Epic Movie, when Nacho Libre spat snot all over Kal Penn, it was in reference to a similar moment from the film it was parodying. Here, we've just got pee-pee for the sake of pee-pee, and the filmmakers drag this gag on for so long that they literally piss all over the film. We are 7 minutes into the Emu War, and I remember at this moment sitting in the theater thinking, could this already be one of the worst comedies I have ever seen? And the rest of the film amplified that louder and louder to a very affirmative yes.
You are responsible for one of the worst blunders in this military's history.
You're lucky you killed World War I Hitler, or I'd have you court-martialed.
See what I mean?
Oh, you think you're so good? Never made a mistake.
I guess I can't argue with that.
Okay, that was actually a decent moment. For all the mediocrity in the script, I will give this movie points for having a cast that does have a lot of energy and proper dedication to the material. The actors show spirited moments of chemistry from time to time, and it occasionally elevates things a little bit.
I need a team to go deep into enemy territory. I need you to go behind enemy lines, to seek out and destroy the emu's leader.
At this point in the film, I remember thinking, okay, so maybe this film's going to take a Dirty Dozen angle. We're going to get a renegade collection of misfits together, watch them train together, get to understand each of them, see the chemistry that develops between them, and then get them into the action. I thought that could have been something.
But that's not the way it happened.
Nope, they just drop us into the bush without any proper introduction for any of them.
I do have a problem, a big problem, with you.
Why is that?
I don't know. Oh, that's right. Because your great-grandfather tried to kill my great-grandfather.
Oh, God, that was ages ago.
It was last week, Buzz.
The past is the past.
Again, I'll give this film credit. The banter between these two is actually not all that bad. Again, the actors are solid, and Aaron Gocs plays into his typical comedy persona so organically. But unfortunately, the moments of natural banter between the actors in this film are so often overshadowed by the lesser material which has been forced into the script. It flattens the comedic mood and drags down the more organic moments. Oh yeah, and one of the soldiers is actually Meredith's daughter, who joined the war to get close to him.
Losing him was hard on both of us. But we still have each other.
Wish the emus had taken you instead.
Apparently this film really does not want you to like its protagonist, and not in a substantial way, in a way where it's meant to be funny. Also, I found Lisa Feinberg to be rather flat in this scene. Damien Callanan sells the over-the-top drama of the character nicely, but Feinberg feels incredibly flat. I also get the impression that they weren't actually together when this scene was shot based on the way everything is framed, and I know this film encountered a lot of production challenges across the COVID pandemic, which may have prevented the actors from doing this scene together and sharing a natural chemistry, but unfortunately she really doesn't display a whole lot of charisma here.
This sheep, it's mine. I didn't steal it.
Okay.
All right, you are good. I was rooting that sheep, yeah.
Okay, so if this film is just going to keep on summoning obscenities out of the blue and calling them jokes, then I'm actually going to have to draw up a diagram on how I think this film was written. So far, we've had suicide, diddling kids, pee, and now bestialities. Somewhere between these concepts and the film's script, there should be other things like context and setup. But no, the Emu War insists on going for the payoff every time by just aiming straight at the jugular. And it misses 99% of the time.
We'll probably get going, but have a great afternoon.
Every day the coppers come to my house and try to stop me from rooting my jumbucks. But I'll show them.
There's a recurring theme in the Emu War where the movie tells a joke and then stretches it out for so long that it thinks it's going to hit an apex, where because it goes on for so uncomfortably long that it actually becomes funny again. Except it's not funny in the first place, and by the time it's meant to have hit that apex, I was just thinking, should I really stay in the cinema? Should I just not get up and walk out of here? You know, it takes a real kind of etiquette to actually pull off that gag, and personally, I think filmmaker Jim Hosking is someone who does it brilliantly. He nailed it repeatedly in The Greasy Strangler because he builds such a consistently awkward tone into the film that it feels natural. But the Emu War goes between trying to make every moment an outrageous punchline and then dragging sporadic jokes out in a manner that just feels too much like a consistent shift. It's much the same style of humor that Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer put into all their parody movies, except that at least once in a blue moon, I found myself laughing during those movies, such as that absurdly long scene in Date Movie where that cat was taking a shit, or the Snakes on a Plane spoof in Epic Movie. But suffice to say, I didn't find a blue moon in Emu War. Oh, hang on, I gotta go get the dog inside. Sheba, on your bed. On your bed, Sheba. Yeah, at the time I'm recording this, I just brought Sheba back inside. She's a cutie and I just want to throw that in there.
I don't eat meat or meat products.
What? What are you on about? No meat.
Makes me sick. Let's go make fun of the vegans and their crazy lifestyle.
Well, what if you got bitten by a snake and you needed an anti-venom and the only anti-venom available was from another snake, and if you didn't have it, you'd die?
I guess I would use the anti-venom to live.
Gotcha, fuckhead.
You know, I've mentioned in a couple of reviews that I am in fact a vegan myself, so you can imagine how many times I've heard this joke. Now, I am all for vegan humor, if it's funny. I haven't heard a lot of funny vegan jokes, but some, such as that one gag from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, had me in stitches.
All right, now pretend that this shoe is an unboned chicken, and you're gonna cook it tonight, make a tasty dinner, and it's gonna smell all through the house like cooked chicken.
Actually, I'm vegan.
Okay, then pretend this shoe is whatever you people eat. Maybe it is a shoe.
The anti-venom joke, or argument as some people would call it, is genuinely one of the laziest jokes I have heard in my life. So of course it comes as no surprise that they wrote it into the Emu War, and yet, ironically enough, this moment was the closest I came to laughing during the first time I saw this movie, simply because of Aaron Gocs' delivery of the line, "Gotcha, fuckhead."
Gotcha, fuckhead.
When one of the laziest jokes I've ever heard is the closest I've come to laughing in a movie, I feel like that just kind of sums it up. And honestly, it feels like in this moment they're trying to be so aggressively unfunny with the joke that they think it's going to become funny, and the audience is then going to laugh at the movie and not with it. I'm not laughing at anything. Speaking of which, then they put all their most valuable belongings into a satchel. And guess what Meredith has in stock?
A dead son's foreskin.
Oh, let's add that one to the diagram. Then the film cuts to a village of emus portrayed with puppets, and this part I really respect. Rather than going the cheap CGI angle, the filmmakers opted to use emu puppets to portray the titular creatures, and the practical effects are both solid and absurdist enough to match the film's ridiculous ambitions. It speaks volumes about the fact that the filmmakers behind this movie really knew how to construct it on a technical level. This is a movie with good costumes, with good cinematography most of the time, and with some pretty likable puppetry effects. The people just needed a script. We get a Deer Hunter inspired scene where Gocsy tortures the village as the human characters ponder the futility of war, and for a moment we get a taste of how the Emu War could have been a much better film. If it portrayed the titular Emu War as some kind of an absurdist tragedy and then just put deadpan humor into it, then I think it would function way better as a comedy. And then it could still have absurdist moments, but they would be a way more stark contrast where the shock factor would then be so much more funny. But no, they just decided to go the lazy angle every time and try to make every single moment an aggressively loud punchline. Speaking of which, then we have a random character sucking on Queen Emu titty milk.
You sicken me.
Do you have a daughter, Major?
Yeah, I do. But just between you and I wish the emus had killed her and not my son.
We get it, Meredith, and I already hate you just like I hate this movie. Can we get a moment where I'm actually going to root for you? Next, we get some outrageous gay stereotypes.
We can explore anything. We never get lost.
Well then, how come your hand got lost down my pants last night and jacked off my dick?
Will. These are the Siamese queers I've been telling you about.
Then one of them is killed by an outrageous Italian stereotype.
The Black Prince of Spaghetti Street was the most decorated sniper in the Italian army during World War I.
Did you hear that? Italian. Look out for the Italian man.
He was called the Black Prince of Spaghetti Street because legend has it the street where he grew up had restaurants that sold spaghetti.
You'll say anything, won't you? Words don't mean a thing to you, do they?
At this point, we're only 25 minutes into the movie, and I actually need to stop outlining my problems with so many of these jokes, because if I do, I will be going on forever. I will give too much of the movie away, which will spoil the mystery for people who want to check it out for themselves, and I'll just be rambling. So let me try to speed up a bit. We get another scene where the joke is incest, then it's over just like that. Our heroes get taken by emus, then that scene's over. Then we spin into a subplot where an unfunny comedian being a complete asshole in a nightclub is hired by the Prime Minister to be an emu impressionist so that they can get her behind enemy lines.
That's crazy. So crazy it just might work.
An emu impression is the hardest impression in the world. It's impossible to pull off. No one is that good.
Well, first of all, through God, all things are possible, so jot that down.
I'm Harold Holt, baby.
No, you're not.
But now we need to find the sexiest and horniest human in this country to fuck the Queen Emu.
Well, I'm convinced, folks, that's pretty much the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
The person who is picked to fulfill the task is a guy who has been trying to trick grieving widows into sex. Because coercive sex is especially funny in the modern day.
I'm horny! I'm horny! I'm horny! I'm horny! I'm horny!
Will you stop saying that?
After an uncomfortably long scene with an unfunny sexual predator, he gets locked up with the others, and Ned Kelly, who is Asian because comedy. Major Meredith then comes up with an idea on how to break everyone out of prison.
Well, imagine how much heat we can generate if the two of us, the priest and Australia's sexiest and horniest man, went absolutely bonkers at each other.
We having a gangbang?
The sheer stupidity of this joke is outweighed only by the fact that the filmmakers chose to visibly censor the genital regions of its characters, breaking the fourth wall in the process and showcasing some truly lazy filmmaking. If you are not going to portray an orgy with all its obscenities, don't write it into the film. If you're going to go ahead and do that anyway, then film it in such a way where you do not have to literally blur the genital region for the sake of getting past the censorship board. I mean, the only other time I've ever seen blurred genitals in a movie was in The Boss Baby. I thought it was kind of ridiculous that the filmmakers did that, but I can understand not wanting to depict a baby's genital region in a kid's movie. Whereas in this film...
Where's the dong?
Well, I think that the studio was thinking the gratuitous nudity was maybe a bit much.
Fuck you.
Bullshit!
The joke continues later when the emus execute the sexual predator before his ghost comes back and starts sucking his own censored dong.
Oh, this is embarrassing.
Yeah, sure is.
We learn that the emu fetishist is actually Meredith's son, who was taken at the start of the film. The emu impressionist kills the queen by giving her oral sex with a cyanide tooth, and then Harold Holt goes off to take a swim.
Harold, you really are the Prime Minister.
It's really telling that the filmmakers had so little faith in the audience, remembering that this character was Harold Holt, that he had to keep reminding himself and us in the process. Then there's a shot of a submarine periscope and the scene just ends. I don't know why they bothered making Harold Holt a part of this film. He is another iconic piece of Australian folklore because, again, for those who don't know, he was the Prime Minister who served during the Vietnam War and took a swim in December of 1967 in Cheviot Beach and disappeared in the ocean, before later on a conspiracy theory was proposed that he hopped aboard a Chinese submarine and lived out the rest of his life in Beijing, while some other people theorized that he committed suicide. He also had a memorial swim center in his name, which this film never bothers to reference at all because, you know, anything that might be funny associated with Harold Holt isn't going to make it into the script. You also might be aware from some of my reviews that I run a Facebook page called Harold Holt Memes. Once in a while, I post something I consider rather humorous, whereas most of the time, I post the most irrelevant content just for the sake of meeting a daily quota. To put it blankly, over the past 9 years, I have probably made all of the absolute least funny jokes anyone could have ever made about Harold Holt. And yet, I was dethroned by the Emu War. I'm almost ashamed I couldn't be as unfunny as this movie. Whatever, we hit the hour mark and the characters are preparing to battle the emus, who have taken Holt hostage.
No! Oh God, I'm gonna piss! I'm pissing! Oh God, I'm pissing! I'm pissing, shitting, and coming myself to death! Ah!
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
There it is, folks, the absolute low point of the movie. The Prime Minister saying, "I'm pissing and shitting and coming myself to death." You can't make a comedy just out of saying naughty words. Eddie Murphy made that explicitly clear.
You couldn't give no curse show or walk out and say, "Hey, felt firm, motherfucker, dick, pussy, snot, and shit. Good night. Good night. Suck my dick. Bye-bye."
I want to welcome you all to Jukebox Harry's School of Comedy, where we are going to be talking about the art of the cum joke. Now, I don't pretend to be a master of comedy, but I know who is. The creators of the TV show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. In one throwaway line from a single episode, I think they actually made the funniest cum joke I have ever heard.
Did you mess with it? Did you cum in it?
Did you come in my burrito?
I didn't cum in your burrito! I wouldn't do that to you!
Now, let's dissect this and talk about what makes the joke work. First of all, this character's emotional flair comes up completely out of nowhere. In just another day in the lives of the main characters, a brain-damaged fellow named Roach makes a truly obscene accusation against his roommate. It works because in a whole episode of ridiculous plot points, this is genuinely the most ridiculous line, setting itself apart from the rest. It also works because the rest of the episode clarifies that the accused is in fact a sexual predator whose specimen has been found in locations all over the mountain, leading to his ultimate arrest. This adds weight to his line, "I wouldn't do that to you." When he says, "I wouldn't do that to you," there is a subtle implication that he would in fact do that to someone else, because he's been coming all over the mountain. This is what I would give an A+ in the school of cum joke comedy. Whereas in the Emu War, I don't think there's a grade lower than F, but I would have to give it. When you dissect that joke, it is legions funnier. When you don't dissect it, you've still got a very irrational, angry man shouting at someone for supposedly coming in his burrito. And in either situation, it is funny. Now, in the Emu War, a man calling himself Harold Holt just says the words, "piss, shit, and cum," and I'm meant to find it funny. I don't. And to paraphrase The Simpsons,
Free comedy tips, Slick. The cum gag's only funny when the saps got dignity.
Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. An absurdly silly battle scene ensues, and it's directed with a lot of flair. The visual effects aren't amazing, but that's hard to care about because the scene has the energy of one of those low-budget monster movies that plays on the Sci-Fi Channel. But the irreverent gags continue to come out of nowhere.
Use your Asperger's bra. Oh, yeah.
I don't get it.
Use your culture.
I still don't get it.
It's just a joke.
Oh, I get it. I get jokes.
How many emus is that you've killed today, Viper?
About 350, Major.
About the same number of Nazis you killed that day we won Gallipoli, isn't it?
Sure is. And the same number of women who gave me a blowy that night.
Now, please, enlighten me.
Who the fuck are you?
Meredith realizes his foe is his son before both his children shoot each other. The humans lose the war and the film ends at the 72-minute mark with the remainder left for credits. Is the Emu War a good movie?
I hated this movie. Hated this movie. Hated it.
hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it.
As I mentioned at the start of this review, the Emu War premiered to uproariously laughter at Monster Fest. People loved it, so this movie has very much found its audience, and seeing the cast and crew interact with everybody and had such a wonderful time was really a wholesome moment. However, I stood there in awe at how much I disliked this movie, and how separated I was from everyone around me because of the divide in opinion. But as more and more reviews of this movie have started coming out, it is clear that I'm not alone in how much I dislike the Emu War. But before I continue to tear into it, I do want to talk about what I like and respect about this movie. First of all, making any feature film is no easy task, and whilst there is a lot I could criticize about how the film is structured or written, it doesn't take away from the fact that Hot Dad Productions still made a feature-length film. They didn't pad the film too heavily, they got it just past the mark of feature length, and they did it with some reasonably solid production values. The cinematography is visionary most of the time, the costumes are convincing, and the cartoonish puppetry effects were really a wonderful touch. The musical score was also great, giving the film a war movie feel. And most of the cast in the Emu War were great. I'll say what I will about the script, but not the actors. Damien Callanan is a truly talented dramatic actor who turns it into overdrive to create an absurd comedic energy, whilst Aaron Gocs plays squarely to his naturally likable charisma and does exactly what his fans would hope to see from him in the movie. The buddy chemistry he develops with Dane Simpson is one of the most enjoyable parts of the film, and Simpson plays to Gocs' energy impeccably. Lisa Feinberg is okay, but she's never given much in the way of comedy as she gets cornered into being a dramatic plot point, and since the film isn't interested in doing much sincere drama, she just gets stranded in a very boring part of the film. Often she feels rather flat, but personally I don't think it's from a lack of talent on her behalf. I think it's because they decided to make her the wet blanket in the movie. She's meant to be the dramatic subplot, but the movie isn't interested in making it a substantial piece of drama, and as such, they also don't decide to do anything funny with her. As for the rest of the actors, I didn't like any of the characters they played, I didn't find any of their lines funny, and I don't think we saw many of their talents come across, so I don't want to ramble on. And now that my praises are done, I'm just going to once again say, this is one of the worst comedy movies I have ever seen in my life, and I've seen Leonard Part 6. Rarely have I seen a film with such a fundamental misunderstanding of comedy like this one. The Emu War insists on making every single joke a completely ridiculous punchline, going for the shock factor every time without bothering to take the steps to build up to it. The entire script is all edge, no point. All outrage, no comedy. All payoff, no build-up. And when every single joke you tell is an edgy shock joke, it is easy to plateau at an equilibrium of flat shock humor. You need to get bigger and bolder each time if you're going to get funnier. And the Emu War fails to ever go bigger. It just thinks by pumping its script full of references to piss, shit, cum, incest, foreskin, and sexual assault, that makes it automatically funny. But it doesn't. Honestly, this film's treatment of Harold Holt is emblematic of everything wrong with the movie. That man's legacy is the fact that he served as Prime Minister until he supposedly drowned in the Point Nepean Ocean in 1967, the fact that a conspiracy theory exists suggesting that he was picked up by a Chinese submarine and lived out the rest of his life in Beijing, and the fact that after he allegedly drowned, they decided to name a swim center in his memory because he was so fond of swimming. Despite all this being the man's legacy, none of it makes its way into the Emu War, aside from that one very brief shot of a submarine periscope. You could change the name of that character to literally anybody else, and it wouldn't change the film at all. In fact, I think it would improve it, because then I wouldn't be annoyed by the fact that it missed the opportunity to do something satirical with Harold Holt. The man playing him doesn't resemble Holt in the slightest, and the time period of the film doesn't coincide with the time that he served as Prime Minister. It is 35 years off, and the script treats Harold Holt the same way it treats every other alleged joke in this movie, without the slightest understanding of what is meant to be funny about it, or how to execute that into something that is going to actually be funny eventually. And if you are going to jam Harold Holt in there and not do anything with it, then I have to ask, why bother?
Good question.
Another thing that makes this film an unpleasant experience is the sheer mean-spiritedness of much of it. The Emu War presents itself as intentionally mindless silliness, but so many of the characters are just aggressively unlikable. Amongst the characters, you have a protagonist who got all his men killed and is then a relentless prick to his own daughter without the dramatic depth or comedic result to justify it. A Prime Minister who does little more than piss himself and joke about diddling kids, an actual sexual predator, and a woman whose entire arc is literally bullying the shit out of everyone and calling it comedy.
Oh, Mom, I'm a little pussy.
The characters of Jackie and Archie are the sole saving grace amongst all this, simply because they feel more like two drongo yahoos just along for the ride, having their own little adventure and bantering the whole time. But there is too much weight on their shoulders from the rest of the film. The way I see it, comedy is established by three basic steps: context, setup, and punchline. In the Emu War, every single gag seems to completely bypass the first two steps and go right for the punchline. The film never establishes any kind of a serious narrative to offset the humor. It just pummels the audience with punchlines without ever stopping to ask why any of them are funny. The TV show South Park once did a brilliant stand-up of the comedy series Family Guy by suggesting that the show was written entirely by manatees, who take 5 individual balls with different subjects or pop culture references to form one of their infamous cutaway gags. The Emu War seemingly goes through the same writing process, except that each time there is far less jokes added to the situation. Most of the time it's just the same ha 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 we're so edgy thing again and again, to the point that I really could not get the unfunny nature of these gags out of my head for weeks after I saw it at the premiere. But for the record, that episode of South Park also established that there is an audience for comedy that's written by manatees because everyone has their own idea of humor, and some people do in fact find things like this funny, which is fair enough.
I mean, I know it's just joke after joke, but I like that. At least it doesn't get all preachy and up its own ass with messages, you know?
After exiting the premiere, I ran into a friend at the after party who enjoyed the movie and referred to it as watchable seltzer, referring of course to Friedberg and Seltzer, the creator of all the movies. I didn't agree with him about the watchable part, but I did agree with him on the seltzer part because as I was sitting in the Emu War, I could not stop thinking about how much it reminded me of Disaster Movie, which of course is considered the worst of all their movies, and for the longest time has maintained the absolute lowest spot on the bottom 100 lowest rated movies on IMDb. Disaster Movie was criticized for relying quite literally entirely on shoving as many pop culture spoofs into its scripts as humanly possible, and filling in the remaining 3% with incredibly lowbrow jokes. If you took all the pop culture references out of Disaster Movie, you would basically have the Emu War. And for context, when I first watched Disaster Movie, I got about 25 minutes into that film before I had to turn it off because I was disliking it so aggressively and not finding anything ironically funny about it, particularly that extended wrestling scene between Carmen Electra and Kim Kardashian, which just went on for way too long. If you look at Friedberg and Seltzer's filmography post-Vampire Suck, you'll notice that it is a particularly low point in their career because they actually stopped getting the funding to put money towards all the outrageous visual gags and props and set designs that they required to try to make their movies funny. Then they just had to rely on their writing, something which has very clearly never been a strong suit of theirs. And that's why all their post-2010 filmography is completely bombed and why they haven't made another film in the past 10 years. As I've said before, for anyone to complete a feature-length film is a pretty incredible feat. But there is one film that I've previously discussed on this show that I think barely qualifies as a feature-length film based on its production, and that is Cool Cat Saves the Kids. That movie was composed of 3 pre-existing short films directed by Derek Savage, hastily strung together into feature-length runtime with some lazy filler in between, such as music videos. And watching the Emu War, it gave me very similar feelings. Granted, the Emu War was entirely original content made with the express purpose of being part of a feature-length film, but it was so hastily strung together with the most threadbare plotting that I still got a similar feeling. Now, it is not uncommon for comedy movies to have the most basic threadbare plot there to serve simply as an excuse to put comedy sketch after comedy sketch together. I mean, some of my favorite, most rewatched comedy movies would be films like Grind, Eurotrip, White Chicks, or the absolute classic National Lampoon's Animal House. Movies which pretty much all follow this formula. Except that those movies do have a narrative, those movies do have characters, and they have a start point and an end point where the characters are meant to get from one point in their lives to another. With the Emu War, the characters just run in circles with no real narrative arcs. And of course I could look past this if the film was funny, but I don't need to repeat my feelings on that. And I'll also mention that the constant reliance on flashbacks and cutaways is just disruptive, meaning that there's never any flow to this film, and all the different settings it cuts to are never interesting. On this series, I have talked about a whole number of comedy movies that have been considered to be some of the worst movies of all time by a number of critics. And there have been times where I have argued against that. Examples such as Freddy Got Fingered or That's My Boy, where the movies, like the Emu War, kept on trying to be shocking and shocking again and again. Except that again, they had characters with destinations in mind, they had an actual story there, and they managed to make their gags funnier by going bigger, bolder, and by actually using setup and context instead of just going straight for the jugular every single time. Yoga Hosers was savaged by critics, but I thought that movie succeeded entirely based on my own personal affinity and affection for Kevin Smith's sense of humor, and the fact that its lead 2 actresses really were full of wonderful chemistry. And also movies like Master of Disguise or Stop and My Mom Will Shoot was so ridiculous because they genuinely thought what they were doing was funny, and that in itself is so aggressively ridiculous that it had me laughing at the fact that the movie was unfunny. I was laughing at it, not exactly with it, but I was laughing. These are all comedy movies that had me laughing. The Emu War simply did not. Its shock factor wasn't amusing, its cast didn't override the shortcomings of the screenplay, it wasn't so unfunny that it was hilarious despite the fact that it attempted this repeatedly, and it did not have enough attention to characters or narrative to rise above its dimensionless insincerity. Basically, there's lowbrow humor, there's incomprehensibly lowbrow humor, and then there is whatever the fuck the Emu War is. This movie aims and sinks lower than the Titanic or the Ocean Gate submersible. This is a movie that means that if audiences are actually liking it, we do need James Cameron to get to the bottom of the ocean and raise the bar so that we don't see films like this getting made anymore. Because as far as comedy goes, this is a complete embarrassment. And the fact that this film got nominated for Best Indie Film at the Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Awards really just reassures me that those awards are completely and utterly full of crap. I've known that for years, but they actually nominated a film for an award that had this in it.
I'm pissing, shitting, and coming myself to death! Ah!
When this film was given the award of Best Film at the 2023 Monsterfest closing ceremony, I turned around and left without saying goodbye to anybody there. That decision, as well as the sheer lack of consideration they showed for filmmakers submitting to their festival that year, really hammered home for me that I never wanted to go back to that festival again. To wrap this review up, I do want to end on a slightly positive note. Comedy is subjective. Everyone has their idea of what they find funny. Everyone is just looking for their escape from the realities of the world, and comedy is a great outlet for that. So if you enjoyed the Emu War, then good on you. I mean, one of my favorite movies ever is The Greasy Strangler. And I remember when I was at the premiere of that movie, a friend of mine decided to walk out after 10 minutes because he found it aggressively grating and unfunny. I can see why he would think that. I found it hilarious, he didn't. We have different opinions. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. And if this movie made people happy and made people laugh, then wonderful. I've seen with my own eyes the joy that this movie has brought people, and I'm really glad. I'm really just sad that I wasn't one of them, and that it stood out to me for being so bad, in my opinion. But as much as I dislike this movie, I champion the hell out of the people that put it together. This isn't a multiple $100 million blockbuster that is meant to just take money from your pockets with no substance. This is a silly little YouTube sketch extended to feature length that was just made by people who wanted to have a go and put themselves out there. And kudos for doing that. I think if Hot Dad Productions were given a much better script, they could produce something hilarious because the technical competence behind this movie is great. And if they could make something actually funny, I would love to see it. So Hot Dad Productions, I would love to see your next movie. I just hope it's a funny one, because I don't find this one to be. The Emu War gets 1 child molester out of 10. It has a fairly wonderful cast working in its favour and some reasonably solid production values. Unfortunately, it is also one of the most unfunny comedy movies I have ever seen, and one of the worst Australian movies I have ever seen in my life. Not as bad as the very excellent Mr. Dundee, and not as bad as The Great Gatsby, if we're going to pretend that that's an Australian movie, but it's definitely down there. And that does it for today's episode of Delightfully Devilish, you guys. If you have any movies you want to see me discuss on this show, please leave them in the comment section below. If you want to see more episodes of this show, please hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, until next time, I've been your host, Jukebox Harry. Peace.